Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hello and welcome to The Print. I am Maushami Dasgupta and you are watching Soft Cover, the Print's platform for the launch of select non-fiction books. The book that we are releasing today is called The Midway Battle, Modi's Roller Coaster Second Term. Authored by film historian Gautam Chintamani, the book looks at the socio-political issues facing India, especially from 2014 onwards when Mr. Modi took over as Prime Minister and how his government is facing the challenge in its second term in office. A cinephile, Mr. Chintamani has authored several books in the past, including the best-selling Dark Star, The Loneliness of Being Rajesh Khanna, the film that revived Hindi cinema, and Pink, the Inside Story. He is equally at ease writing on Bollywood as well as on world cinema. His first foray into political non-fiction genre was in 2019 when he authored Rajniti, a biography of Rajnath Singh, our defense minister. Mr. Chintamani's writing has also featured in publications across the world. He has contributed original essays to the British Film Institute. He was also on the National Film Awards jury for Best Writing on Cinema in 2016. Welcome to The Print, Mr. Chintamani, and many congratulations on your book.
Thank you so much, Maushami. Pleasure to be here.
Before we go further, sir, I would like to show the book, The Midway Battle, Modi's Roller Coaster Second Term. The book is published by Bloomsbury. You can also hold the book, sir, and so that our viewers can get a look. So here's the book, The Midway Battle. Before we go any further, thank you again, Mr. Chintamani, and I'm sure our viewers and readers will order and read the book. Thank you for joining us. Now, without wasting any more time, let's go directly into the book. And the first question I want to ask you is, what made you choose Prime Minister Narendra Modi's second term in office as a subject for this book?
So there were a lot of factors that went into the idea of this book, and it started off as an insight into what entails the Great Indian Election. So 2014 was a very significant election, a black swan moment, many would say. But I also feel that in 2019, after many years, a government was going to the electorate with the idea of presenting a report card. Usually in the past, what we had seen was that, governments would go and with the idea of a promise that this is what we will deliver. So in 2004, the government went back with its report card. Similarly here, it was a very important thing because the 2019 election changed the way the electorate also reacted to what was being presented to it. In that aspect, I felt that 2019 election, especially if you remember at the beginning of the year, we had the heinous attack in Pulwama, and that response, government's response, and a few other things that happened in the first term made the options very clear in the mind of the electorate, whether they want to vote or they don't want to vote. There were hardly any fence sitters, I would say, when it came to the 2019 election. In that aspect, also what is very significant was that the manifesto that BJP presented before the 2019 election, it clearly stated goals which the electorate could ask judge the performance based on midway into the Modi's second term. So it was very interesting the way the election propped up. But world has changed a lot in the last few months. I don't remember any other time in the recent past where so much had happened in such a small amount of time. In that aspect, keeping these factors in mind, and also what the government achieved in the last 7 years, is very important because bridging of the final mile when it came to social programs, also the way the pandemic was handled in the sense that uh, food and money was provided to people directly into their accounts and at home. So all these things made it a very interesting election to look at. But more than that, the moment Mr. Modi came back into office, the mild decisions taken by the government in a short span of time, the landmark decisions, be it the CA, be it the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act, all these things are very important in history. And I remember reading somewhere that if you're too close to events which are taking place in history, perhaps you cannot see the impact that it would have over a period of time. Of course, historians enjoy the idea of the luxury of time to gauge, but I also feel that in present time, the reaction that a lot of us have had to events which have undertaken or unfolded in front of us also make an important discourse. So my idea behind this book was that not only in India, if you look at the local politics, if I may use that word, but also the geopolitics right now where India is placed in the world affairs, be it the foreign policy shift that India has seen in the last 5 years, especially since Mr. Modi's first term, whether being focusing on the looking east or the new geostrategic partnerships that India has struck, the influx and the upgradation of the defense sector in India. All these things are also important because in the wake of the pandemic, we have seen that how there has been a tectonic shift when it comes to viewing world powers. And I think India is a place where it is taking its claim as a world leader. And there is a lot of interest in India right now. So I think I wanted to get a sense of all these things for myself as a reader and as an author and a historian, but also for the readers to see that a lot has happened, and sometimes it becomes difficult to keep track of things. So the idea of the battle where we stand, where India stands, not just in the world or a lot of other places, I wanted to get an essence of that in this book.
Okay, the release of this book comes, coincides with what could be called a challenging time for the Modi government. The farmers' unrest demanding the withdrawal of the farm laws, is at its peak. You have referred to it in your book also. We saw the violence that happened in Lakhimpur Kheri and how the incident, where 8 people were killed, including 4 farmers, has now snowballed into a major political controversy. How do you see it?
I see the farm laws as a big moment in India's history because it does shift from a kind of state control and allowing the farmer a certain kind of freedom which they never enjoyed up until now. I mean, a lot of people don't understand a simple statement or don't want to see a simple statement in a light without any embellishment that up until the formation of these laws, a farmer from a certain state in India could not sell his or her produce in another part of India. If I look at, say, cinema, and if I tell filmmakers that you may not be able to release your film in certain markets or certain territories unless you follow these rules, they would cry blue murder. That same context, in the same context, I think that the farm laws are actually a great moment in time where we are an agrarian society. I mean, we cannot deny that India is हमारा देश गांव में माना जाता है, कहते हैं लोग. So उसके संदर्भ में अगर आप देखें, if you look at in that context, then I think that these laws are very important and they benefit the farmer. A lot of things are happening around us. Things are unfolding. Law and order needs to be. There cannot be any kind of foul act. And I think the government on many occasions has made it very clear that they're willing to sit across the table and actually listen into the demands. And there is there are many factors to the farmers' agitation. You don't know who's leading, who's representing. So there are many things that I don't want to go into right now. But if you look at the farm laws per se, I think they are a very great thing for the farmers, and I think they are beneficial. I don't know why certain parties are not allowing the clarity on the bills.
That's my second question also, that if you see the Lakhimpur Kheri incident, we have seen political parties cutting across party lines. Be it the Congress, the Samajwadi Party, the Rashtriya Lok Dal, they have visited Lakhimpur Kheri, met the families of the victims who were killed. So do you think the incident will help rally opposition parties ahead of assembly election in Uttar Pradesh scheduled early next year? As in rallying
Yeah, so in my book, I do mention that what decides the central theme of an Indian election is not something that comes overnight. So, for example, when it came to the 2019 elections, a lot of the opposition and a lot of the social political commentators were of the opinion that the Pulwama Act and the Indian response to that, addressing the terrorist outfit which is responsible for this and taking preemptive strikes is what changed the election. So there was a lot of reportage, an on-ground reportage, which found it surprising that people whom the commentators would not think would take into consideration something like India's image globally as an electoral factor were surprised to hear. I mentioned this in my book that a lot of Delhi journalists or a lot of metro journalists would visit small town India and be surprised that the electorate was very impressed with the way Mr. Modi had created India's image at a global stage. And they were surprised that besides the local issues, why are these things of a concern to the electorate? So when it comes to election in India, when it comes to be it the state election or state assembly election or be it the Lok Sabha election, every election hovers around some theme, and whoever is in the opposition will try to drum up what they think is a burning issue, is a significant issue. But the voter has time and again showed that there is a certain kind of a disconnect between commentators and even political parties, because if you look at certain players, if I can use that term when it comes to election, for example, I remember TV debates talking a lot about Mayawati or somebody like that being a kingmaker. And this was at a time when Mayawati's party did not have a single seat in the previous Lok Sabha. So I don't understand how is somebody who does not have a single seat in the Lok Sabha, in the biggest democracy of the world, can be a player. So I think that these the electoral themes, the issues on which elections are fought are dependent from party to party, from organization to organization, and when it comes to media, even news media or political commentators end up bringing their viewpoint, perspective, or prejudice, and I use these words very carefully, into whatever they're commenting on, which is a normal human tendency. So there will be a lot of issues when it comes to Uttar Pradesh elections. There will be a lot of focus on just about anything which is making news, but there are also certain facts about the state, just like the Indian Lok Sabha election, 2019 election, that governance will play a huge role, because if a significant portion of this country, which is more than 65% of this country, is under the age of 25, many of them, for them, an event in the 90s or early 2000s is a historical event. So don't know the disconnect between you and the electorate, and the electorate is now consists of men and women who are very well aware the power of internet, the connectivity that internet enjoys in this country, which is also one of the big achievements of Modi government, especially in the first term and the early part of the second term, the internet connectivity which is connecting gram panchayat and villages. So it's not like the news does not reach, all perspectives of the news do not reach the electorate at the ground level. So a lot of things will play, but I think that beyond all these things, governance is going to be a huge factor when it comes to elections in India from this point onwards.
Adding on to this, again, I mean, and also I'm going back to your book. So maybe because the Modi government had the numbers, I mean, they had the majority, they had managed to bring in, many long due governance reform, like you rightly mentioned in your book also, be it the passage of the, the 4 labor codes, creation of the post of Chief of Defence Staff, be it the passage of the farm laws, abrogation of Article 370, abolition of triple talaq, many governance reforms which earlier parties which were in power had talked about at different points of time but failed to do so because of various reasons, including political compulsion. But despite this, despite the fact that the Modi government was able to push through this reform, the government has quoted controversy and invited stringent criticism and protest over some of these measures. So how do you explain this dichotomy? Because these
I don't, yeah.
These are the
I don't.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, please continue.
Yeah, because these were the reforms. It's not that then the Modi government came to power and suddenly decided one fine day that the new labor codes would be passed. So they have been in the making for a long time. Different governments at different points of time had talked about it, but they failed to do anything. Now a government is doing this, and it's inviting criticism for doing it. So there is a dichotomy, and how do you explain it?
Okay, so I don't see that as any dichotomy from where I stand. And in my research or in my interaction, okay, let's look at it this way, that yes, Mr. Modi wins elections. Yes, Mr. Modi has the public's mandate. But we forget a very important aspect in the whole conversation is that what is this mandate for? And when you go back to the electorate, what do you go back on the basis of? So at the end of the day, winning an election is all about legislation. How do you pass a law? You can only pass the law if you either have the numbers, like you said, or it is tested on the floor of the House and it is passed unanimously. In all major reforms that the Modi government has undertaken, it has been put to the floor of the House. Now, to say that there is a controversy in it, or like a lot of Western media reports, and to a great extent even Indian media, a lot of Indian media is saying that these are, I'm using words which I keep hearing, draconian laws, or pulverizing the tenets of democracy and what have you. But look at something like the farm laws. Every government has been talking about that. Every government is trying to say that you need to bring this sector, the agriculture sector, the farming sector, into the 21st century. Or look at the abrogation of Article 370 or the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act. It was never put to the floor of the House in its original state. This is the first time when a bill was tabled and the floor of the House voted. So I don't see any dichotomy in that. Yes, there have been an opposition. There has been an opposition. Yes, there have been protests. But I also look at it from a different perspective. I feel that a lot of stakeholders, be it political or be it socio-political, are losing ground. If you are going to fight on the basis of something and that thing does not exist anymore, so are you done fighting, or do you need to look for something else? So there is a lot which you can criticize about anybody. You can praise somebody, you can criticize somebody, but the point has to be valid. So to say that laws were not put to the floor of the House would be completely wrong. To say that there is a dichotomy, I also disagree with that, because then the public's mandate, then the electorate voting, should give people an indication of where it stands with these decisions. Like, for example, there is a constant debate about demonetization and that people didn't accept it. There is some argument that commentators will give. Sure, they have every right to their point of view. But I also put in case that if it really impacted the way people were saying, would the government have been voted back? So certain things you have to see from both sides. And I think what has happened is also that political commentary, not just in India, but in the world, as we say, has become very polarized. So when it comes to commenting on some events, you have to look at things from both perspectives. I may not like what you're saying, or you may not like what I am saying, but for me, that should not change if you're quoting a factual thing. Like, for example, if you look at the US presidential election, Donald Trump was to my memory, was perhaps the first president in many decades, American president who did not start a war. The Abraham Accords, if you look at it, or the inroads that US made with North Korea. So the things that you are actually blaming somebody or accusing somebody of, did they really happen in the way that you're trying to say? For me, Trump did not start a single war. That's a very big thing. For me, I have some family in the US, and I have friends, and I follow US politics quite closely and world politics. The manufacturing industry was doing very well there. So certain things, I may not like Trump or I may like Trump. That's besides the point. In that aspect, to answer your question, I think all these laws which were passed were debated in the parliament, were presented on the floor of the House, and they passed the floor of the House. So, for example, if you look at the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act, or even if you look at triple talaq, it could have been it could have been possible for the government to pass these as an ordinance. They had the mandate, they could do that, but they did not want to do that, or they did not do it. At the end of the day, when you look at the facts, it was tabled, it was cleared by the House. So I don't see the dichotomy as such, but yeah, there is an opposition. People are protesting. People have a right to express themselves. So that these two things stand where they are.
Right. You have followed Mr. Modi's political career since he took charge for the first time in 2014. So how will you compare his, first term in office with, with his second term? Though, in the second term is just 2 years that the government has completed. But how will you compare both in terms of governance as well as how he has evolved as a politician?
I think the last 7 years, 5 and 2.5 years, have been very significant for India across the board. In that aspect, I feel that the first in my biography of Mr. Rajnath Singh, who was then the Home Minister and now the Defence Minister, a considerable portion of Modi government's first term is covered. The focus is definitely the Home Ministry, because Mr. Singh was the Home Minister at that time. But in addition to the ministry, the Home Ministry, I think that across the board in the first term, a lot of groundwork was laid to bring India up to speed with progress. I use that word in an overall aspect, was very important. So be it the IT sector, be it the social programs, be it the shift in the mindset as well as the way the financial sector operated. Like, I remember people saying that, you and I would both agree on this, that if 10 years ago I had said that you could buy a kg of potatoes from your neighborhood vegetable vendor and make a digital payment, you and I both might not have believed it. We might not have believed that India would be the country where such a thing would be possible. As luck would have it, exactly a decade ago in 2012, I was traveling the US, and both my wife, we came across a lot of incidents where it was very difficult to make an online payment. Cash was still king there. So, you would not think that a country like US would have that kind of a problem. And in that aspect, I feel that in the first term, a lot of work was done, and that foundation on which the Modi government was operating has only gotten strengthened with the 2019 elections and the work that we are seeing right now, especially in two aspects, foreign policy and defense. I think in the second term, these two have been very important, very significant, because they coincided with the global coronavirus pandemic. Brought nearly all countries in the world at a level playing field, be it the US or be it first world countries or be it any country. We were for a significant period at the same level. The search for the vaccines or the way you were going to handle the humanitarian crisis. I think in that, keeping our population and especially our density of population in mind, the work that the government has done has been key and has been fantastic. In terms of a leader, I think Mr. Modi is still a work in progress, because he is becoming and taking India to a point where India actually gets a seat at the global table. So let's look at 2 or 3 incidents to get an idea of the journey of Modi the statesman and Modi the. So look at the first speech that the Prime Minister gave at the General Assembly in his first term. That was a speech which laid the foundation for not only India's foray as a world player, but also how Mr. Modi can become, or was on his way of becoming, one of the most important leaders in the world. Of course, we are 1/7 of the world. Population-wise, anybody representing us has a huge responsibility. But asking the United Nations to define terrorism, asking the United Nations to update and bring itself to the 21st century, otherwise you will become a toothless tiger, so to speak. And at the same time, bringing the world at a cultural equivalence by asking, say, gifting Yoga Day to the world. So these are few things which show that how he has a grasp, not just over the political aspects of global events, but also the social cultural aspects. Like, for example, I was working on a book which is a biography of Nauf Marwai. She's a Saudi citizen, and a woman from Saudi Arabia single-handedly trained 10,000 people in yoga. She is Saudi Arabia's first certified yogacharini. And she was having trouble with the religious fundamentalists and the religious police in Saudi Arabia. But the beginning of Yoga Day, where she conducted classes for the Indian embassy there, really a kind of confluence of these two cultures. And you can see Mr. Modi's government awarded Nauf Marwai the Padma Shri in 2018. So, woman embarking on a journey of yoga and bringing countries like India and Saudi Arabia together, these are aspects that the Prime Minister understands very well. And the fact that we are the world is a family is something which India has always harped on, and every government has tried to do something where it brings the world closer. And I think in the last 7 years, what the Modi government has done at a global level, I mention a lot of this in my book. Like, for example, when it comes to simple things like high quality petroleum. Now, India, because of its size, can import this, but the cost would be too much for countries like Nepal or Sri Lanka in the Indian subcontinent. But it was India that's giving high quality petroleum to these countries, or giving sharing the satellite for weather and other things, helping countries like Mongolia with an oil refinery, or the African countries. These kind of strategic tie-ups, or the Quad that we look at right now. Quad is essentially the achievement of India under Prime Minister Modi. If you look at things like vaccine Maitri also, in the initial stages when the cases were not so high in India, these are things which completely were unimaginable when it came to India just a few years ago. So in that aspect, that Mr. Modi as a Prime Minister, as a statesman in both these terms, has only gone from strength to strength. And it is still a work in progress. I think the next few years. That's why I call the book the Midway Battle, because wherever we stand right now, it is a huge. Are we look at the way China has uncovered itself post coronavirus pandemic. Look at the inroads that China has made into the universities in Australia or the UK or the United States. The Chinese presence there. The BRI initiative of China, is it imperialist? Is it something more than what it appears to be? All these things have started unfolding now, and in that aspect, India is not a substitute for China just because of size. That okay, you can take China out or you can put that. India is in its own right everything that the world needs right now, and we have a government in place which is doing the work to push that idea forward. So I think it is still a work in progress when we look at Mr. Modi, and there has been a huge jump from the first term to the second term, and foreign policy is one aspect to look at it. Defense is the other aspect to look at it, and these are the two things that I focus on in my book as well.
Yeah, you have mentioned elaborately on these two aspects in your book. I'll ask you another question here, that one of the criticisms that Prime Minister Modi has faced time and again since he came to power in 2014 during his first term was a strong aversion to the media. Very rarely has the Prime Minister engaged with the media. So how do you see this? And also, do you think that that some of the criticism that his government has invited in the 2 terms in power could have been avoided had he engaged with the media more freely and dispelled the misgivings about his government?
So I will ask you this thing, that what is the media's role when it comes to the head of a state, or in this case, the Prime Minister of India? It is to question, which the media is doing. It is to convey the Prime Minister's message to the electorate. I mean, it's like a bridge between these two aspects. If we understand that correctly, then Mr. Modi is one of the first leaders in the world who has ensured that he has a direct connect with the electorate. So be it the use of technology, be it one of the biggest leaders right from the onset on Twitter, or there is nothing lacking in Mr. Modi's communication with the electorate. Yes, there are some misgivings about certain things that could be cleared, but we have also seen that there have been instances where the delivery mechanism of the message when it comes to media or when it comes to political commentators has been a big contributor to this kind of confusion as well. So both parties are correct. Yes, I don't see anything wrong in the media questioning the government. It has every right to do so. But also at the same time, I think that, leaders such as Mr. Modi, or if you look at President Trump in the recent past, they have also been targeted by media for a lot of things that may not have been attributed to them directly. Like, for example, I don't understand that how can the President of the United States be deplatformed from Twitter? If you, on the one hand, are promoting freedom of speech and you feel that every person has an equal right to express, how do you curb somebody, or how do you flag a tweet, a message? So that is the organization which is taking this decision. So if you don't like one part of the story, you can control that or you can curb that. But there is another aspect to that. So yeah, I mean, traditionally the Prime Minister interacts with media. Traditionally, there are annual press conferences or what have you. I don't see anything wrong in the media questioning. Media is still getting to question. There is enough communication from the government. High-ranking ministers conduct interactions with the press regularly. So I don't see that big a problem when it comes to media not having access to the Prime Minister the way it used to. Senior ministers comment on just about everything. There are press conferences almost every day, and all of the ministers, all the government ministries have a great online presence. So there can be a connect with the media. So if you're asking me that, unlike the times before, the Prime Minister's access is limited to media, sure, that's actually correct. But I don't see any problem from the communication aspect. That's my personal opinion. I feel that nearly all ministers in this country, not just all politicians in this country, not just the ones who are in government, but also the oppositions and just about everybody, is very vocal. There is a lot of interaction. There is a single degree of separation between anybody and the highest office today. I can give you my own example from the first term. I had applied for a BSNL telephone connection. I got a connection. The address was wrong. My name was incorrect, and it did not serve any purpose. And I wrote a letter to the IT minister, the secretaries, the BSNL offices here in Haryana, in Delhi, and I wrote a letter to the Prime Minister's office. I copied. You will not believe I got responses from everybody in post saying that, yes, this is the number of your complaint. We have registered it and it has been done. These are the numbers that you can get in touch with. Honestly, I have done this in the past also. I never expected a response, but I got an acknowledgement from every single office, right from my circle manager for BSNL here in Haryana up until the highest office in this country. So I don't, in my own personal experience, I don't see any problem as far as communication goes. Yeah, if you're asking me, like the past, if the PMOs, the access to the Prime Minister is not as the same, that's true. It's not the same.
Okay. A very speculative question I'll ask you now is, how do you see, BJP and Mr. Modi's chances in 2024?
We are still a long way from 2024, but I think some media houses conducted or have been regularly conducting the mood of the nation kind of a survey where you're looking at the approval ratings of the Prime Minister, and you're asking pop questions like, if the elections were to be held today, who would you vote for? Across the board, Mr. Modi has emerged as the ideal choice for whoever was participating in that poll. Even global polls, in fact, just when the book was going to press, Prime Minister Modi's ratings were the highest approval ratings in the world. So if these things are to be taken into consideration, then I think the answer lies very open and very clear for all of us to see. I think that the young people of India are not the kind of, they don't have the kind of attitude that my generation or previous generations had, where the chalta hai attitude, or you would accept things for how they stood. They are used to options, they're used to expressing themselves, they're used to demanding what is right. And many of them, a huge number of them, are also aware of their duties as citizens. So that balance is quite interesting right now. These people are not going to get swayed by things that they don't want to believe in. They are going to look at deliverables. And I think Mr. Modi's attitude, Mr. Modi's government's functioning is almost like on that aspect where you fix accountability, where you fix what needs to be delivered, and you have these constant checks and balances in place. Like, for example, take the whole LED electrification drive, or the India's electrification drive, for which then Minister Piyush Goyal also created an app following a conversation with the Prime Minister, that can you gauge what is the degree of electrification which has taken place, what is the percentage right now, can people complain, can people check. All these things are available at the click of a button or on your fingertips. So these are things that people take into consideration when it comes to voting. We have seen that in enough elections that this is a very important factor. And to quote a pop culture reference, like the Bob Dylan song goes, you don't need a weatherman to tell you which way the wind is blowing. So the answer it definitely lies in the wind. And if you ask me, then these are the important factors. Where India stands today, what are the deliverables, how much was promised, what was given, and governance is going to be a huge factor. And I think in that aspect, the Modi government has performed very well, especially keeping in mind that the world is facing a global pandemic and many things stand in flux. In that aspect, I think India is not as bad as the world is. I mean, there are. If you've been reading the news in the United Kingdom and in England, you have police and the army guarding petrol pumps right now. There is an energy shortage. So if you look at all these things, India is doing quite fine, and I think these are the factors which will play on the electorate's mind when it comes to any elections.
Mr. Chintamani, you have written a biography on Rajesh Khanna. You have written many books on films. So, moving away from politics, how different is writing a book on a Bollywood star or a movie from writing on politics?
So, I look at them as subjects, and for me, from an anthropological point of view, socio-political, cultural events and people who capture that, who capture the zeitgeist, becomes very important. Even if I look at somebody like Rajesh Khanna, or I look at somebody like Mr. Modi or Rajnath Singh ji, for me, the role that they have played at the positions that they were in becomes very important. So if you look at Rajesh Khanna, and if you look at how Mr. Khanna changed in the late 60s, post the Indo-China war, where you were questioning a lot of things. So you see that the change in the olden stars, by 1967, Dilip Kumar had his last big hit in Ram Aur Sham. That was the time where Raj Kapoor had almost stopped playing the lead. Rajinder Kumar, Shami Kapoor were there, but they were also in a state of flux because you didn't know which way you were going. So people like Dharmendra, Rajesh Khanna, who were emerging at that time, captured that zeitgeist very well. So for me, that becomes an important aspect. That becomes more significant than the affairs or how much he was charging at that time. So when it comes to writing on films, I'm also looking from a historian's perspective, and not just entertainment or superfluous things in that aspect. So for me, somebody like a Rajnath Singh being a part of nearly every important office in Indian polity, right from being a student leader to being the home minister of this country, gives a complete overarching aspect to look at how politics in India has changed. In that same aspect, if you look at Mr. Modi's journey right now, or if you look at somebody like Vinod Khanna, on whose biography I'm working next, all these factors play a huge role. So for me, as a writer, it's not that different, films or politics, because at the end of the day, it's all about connecting with the people, and it's all about going back to the people and asking them to repose their faith in you, basis their performance. So in one aspect, you impact the emotional quotient a little more when it comes to acting or cinema or culture. And in the other one, it perhaps impacts a person's life in all aspects. But at the end of the day, it's all about connecting, and it's all about delivering. So for me, it's the story and the event and their time and place in history, which is the first go-to factor than the personality per se.
But which of the genres you enjoy more, as in writing on Bollywood, writing on films, or writing on politics? Because this is your second book on politics. So
yeah, so as luck would have it, that the film personalities that I focused on, say Rajesh Khanna or now Mr. Vinod Khanna, and in the writing of that period, be it Amitabh Bachchan or say even Govinda to some extent, or all these people that who captured the imagination at that period, Hema Malini or Dharmendra, they have all had they have all forayed into public life. So, sometimes I get everything in one person, but I enjoy the topics. So for me, it's a little bit about shifting gear, but I'm a huge film fan. I mean, I'm a film buff, like they would say. But also, growing up in the 80s, and my father was in the army. I am a South Indian, but I grew up largely in Allahabad, and I started studying there. Uh, Both my wife and I were kids, so we were been all over the country. So for me, all these aspects end up playing a huge role. So even though I might not have a direct connection with Uttar Pradesh in that sense, but I could find a kind of connect with Rajnath Singh ji because a part of my family comes from Allahabad. I grew up in Allahabad. So for me, it's all about that book that I'm working on. But yeah, I would like to not limit myself to a particular genre because stories are everywhere, and there are a lot of these stories which need to be told for the younger generation, because it bamboozles me at times that 65% of this country had no idea that once upon a time you had to stand in a line for just about everything. You had to stand in a line for a scooter, a gas connection, to make an STD call, to deposit money in banks, and even a watch. I mean, the other day I saw a old photo from the 1970s where people had queued up in Delhi to buy an HMT watch. So a lot of them, you can see that in films, or you can see that in popular culture, but everything comes into play when you're writing a book, and for me that becomes more important.
With this, we come to the end of this edition of Softcover. Thank you so much, Mr. Chintamani, for joining us. It was a pleasure talking to you. And once again, many, many congratulations on your book.
Thank you so much. The pleasure was entirely mine.